A Spoonie is a member of a community of chronic illness sufferers, what some people have described as Munchausen by internet. What happens when your identity becomes illness? Because how are you ever incentivized to get well?
If your community identification is defined by how ill you are, then a status hierarchy is going to begin to form based on illness.
Right.
And people being people, they are going to have a motivation to exaggerate their illness.
Would you like to know more?
Okay.
Anyway, I am so excited for our special guest here today. Easily our favorite writer. It's on the show today. This is Suzy Weiss. We mentioned her in a number of episodes as just a writer who we really respect and does really interesting, deep based pieces that explore subcultures that are weird, which is like our favorite thing. Today, we are going to do the first piece of hers that we really got into, where I was like, oh, this changes my thinking on a number of things about how
Yes.
like mimetic viruses can form
Mm.
within current online environments.
And how we're gonna
Um,
raise our teenage daughters. Like it completely like
Oy.
it gave us a new model for female adolescence. It was a game changer.
Aw.
and where we should send people. So the Snoozy Weiss is her Twitter account. So go
Yeah.
subscribe there. Although that never really converts is YouTube to Twitter. But what I can say is the Free Press. Her sister Barry Weiss runs it, and she is a writer there, and that's where you can find her stuff. So you should definitely go and subscribe to that.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for having me. I feel like when we discovered each other, it was like, there are others. I'm so happy. And then, of course, I included you on a story I did about tech messiahs who wanted to live forever, which I loved your contribution because you were like anti live forever, which I think is like a weird, whatever. We can get into that
Did you
later, but
ever
I
end
love
up
that.
talking to that other girl we introduced you to for that story?
I never talked to her because she just, I think,
She's
yeah, she was intense.
No,
Uh,
she recently did a post where she bragged about how she convinced a woman to break up with her husband for another woman and get an abortion on her 3 months term fetus. And this was like a huge win for her, is talking someone into an abortion. That's pretty late stage, right? Or that
3 months
early.
it's on the older side of fairly
Yeah,
reasonable, so
horrifying. We were trying to get the perspective of an extremist antinatalist.
oh, yeah,
And
she's a major antinatal. Yeah, I guess that's a win. Take the ones where you can get them.
So the full post she wrote went, one of the grossest and most phaliocentric types of misogyny to me is males who are fine with or even encourage their wives or girlfriends having sex with other women. Porn sick bros with harem fetishes. It's an ugly and very clear mask off on how they see women. They feel so superior that a girl fucking their wife doesn't even count as sex, and thus cheating lesbians are just quote unquote girls having fun that we do to please their stinky cheese cocks. And few things are as satisfying as seeing their wives realize they can do better, divorcing them for their girlfriends, and living happily ever after without a sexist leech in their life. 2 months ago, I convinced a girl who just married and was actually 3 months pregnant to get an abortion and divorce and continue dating her girlfriend, who the male picked for her, but who she fell in love with. They are engaged, and I am so for it. Heart. In case you can't tell, she is a lesbian, maybe even a political lesbian, and an extremist feminist as well as an antinatalist.
yeah, she's in favor, I think, of even post-term abortions, as she puts it.
So murder?
Yeah, some murder.
yes.
But baby murder, so it's
It's
baby.
cute.
It's
I
a
think it was
tiny
her
murder.
calling
Murder. It's murder.
It's murder, yes.
Anyway, so
Spoonies.
Spoonies.
spoonies, go. I am so excited to dig into this.
Yeah,
one.
well, first off, what made you decide to explore this world? How did you even
Well,
learn
sorry, the
about it?
audience needs to know what they are first, so I'm letting
Right.
her describe
Yes,
that before
yeah,
we
yeah,
go into
yeah.
questions like this.
Okay, so what is a Spoonie? A Spoonie is a member of a community of chronic illness sufferers. They're mostly women. From what I could observe, they're mostly white women. The term comes from, I believe it was like a 2013 or 2014 blog post by this lupus blogger. And she had a well friend who asked her, what is it like to be sick? And she took all the spoons. I just reread the post last night because I wanted to be reminded of it. And it's strangely like cinematic. She's like, "With tears in my eyes, I held the bouquet of spoons." And I don't not believe her, but it's just interestingly written. And she describes that like normal people have unlimited spoons, people who are sick have a fixed number of spoons. So let's say you or I, we could get up and shower and make ourselves breakfast and go to work and we don't have to think about it. Someone with, let's say, 6 spoons has to portion them out. So 2 spoons to wake up and get dressed, 1 spoon to make lunch. Do you have enough spoons to work? And I think it is like an effective way for people to think about other people who have limited resources. But
Yeah.
since then, it's been co opted into a cottage industry, a world, a community of people who suffer from these sort of amorphous and hard to pin down illnesses. So, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, POTS, autoimmune diseases, ulcerative colitis, you name it. And they're
Wait,
called
POTS is included in that? I have POTS. That's
food
crazy.
POTS. Yeah,
I can be
well,
a Spoonie.
yeah, you could be a Spoonie, and you would find a
Yeah.
lot of like-minded Spoonies out there, and you could buy different products with your Spoonie codes and learn how to lie to a doctor, which is apparently like a moral thing in this world. So, yeah, I was interested in what some people have described as Munchausen by internet, and like this where the psychosomatic like I guess what I was really interested is what happens when your identity becomes illness, because how are you ever incentivized to get well? And I spoke to a lot of people and doctors, and that's the story that you're referring.
Yes, so I want to talk about that, but before we go further, I'm going to take and just word this a little differently.
Yeah.
Essentially, what happened and what created the Spoonies is that if you have a either a chronic illness condition or a short-term illness condition where you are frequently going into a medical setting, of
Mhm.
course, you are going to tweet about this and find other like-minded people. Now, like any social community, hierarchy within a community is often determined by things that differentiate you from mainstream society and make you more aligned with that community. Within a goth circle, if I'm meeting a goth I haven't met, the more gothy they dress, the higher status I assume they are because they are othering themselves from mainstream society in a way that shows dedication to a community. Well, if your community identification is defined by how ill you are, like if that's the what correlates the community, then a status hierarchy is going to begin to form based on illness,
Right.
and people being people, they are going to have a motivation to exaggerate their illness, find ways to get on more visible forms
Yeah,
of
a
treatment.
lot of it is about externalizing because a lot of these illnesses that I listed, they're invisible illnesses, you can't see them.
Mm,
So a lot of these women will use crutches, casts, not tourniquets, but, like, you get what I like, ways to show to
like
pick
any sort of
lines, like
sling.
food
Yeah.
feeding tubes to show that they're sick. So I think it's really
Yeah.
interesting, and yeah, sorry, I
And then,
don't
yeah, well, and then doctors will say, well, you don't actually have these illnesses. And so then they need to make the doctors for the community the villains.
right.
And
Wasn't there like a word that they used, like zebra?
zebra something.
Yeah.
Yes, so that's an old medical adage, if you hear hooves, think horses, not zebras, so
Mm,
if someone's coming it's, like, the real world is not an episode of House, not everyone has the, like, deep cut, weird disease that you can own that no one's seen a case of in 100 years, but the Spoonie mantra might be, "I am the zebra, I am this rare thing," and it has to do, I think, and you brought up, teenage girls, like, kind of this need to be special. I was thinking about
Mhm.
it this morning. 8 or 9 years ago, there were these movies like Me, Earl and the Dying Girl, Fault in Our Stars, like that sort of romanticized illness and being sick and dying. So there's a lot that goes into it. And what you were saying about like hierarchies and structures, I think a lot of the Spoonie world dovetailed with the Me Too movement that kind of became really suspicious of, let's say, male dominated hierarchies and created a world in which patients were being victimized by doctors. It's left-wing QAnon. And they're trying to take away your agency and power. I see a lot of overlap.
Yeah, well, and it makes sense that something like this would organically form within young female communities that are looking for affirmation. And I think in a sense of community, and they get affirmed by the community, but then they begin to do things like you talk about in the article, like pill porn, like
Right.
mixing pills, and there's like special status if you need tubes. And there's,
And if they up your feed, that's like a bad thing because it means you're getting better and that you might one day get off the tube. And, like, I wanna be clear, like and this was a really hard subject to write about. I think these girls are actually feeling pain. I don't think they go
oh
into
no,
their
of course.
bedrooms and shut the door and jump out of their wheelchair and say, "Ha, I tricked another doctor today." I'm not sure that their pain, um, is a symptom of what they think it's a symptom of. I think that's the best way to put it. But yeah, what you said is correct of the need to externalize and differentiate and make unique according to your illness.
Also, when you're looking at this from the context of young girls who are coming at this, they're beginning to try to find themselves, they're going through puberty a lot of the times. And I think that female sexuality is broadly misunderstood in our society.
Mm,
And I think part of what we're seeing here when women first go through puberty is a need to be cherished or treated like something special and fragile that is cared for,
mm.
which this self framing elevates. So you almost get this perfect storm of hierarchy, affirmation, and
Victimhood.
Yeah.
victimhood, this and I'm unique to such an extent where when I was reading your piece, I was like, how do I protect my own kids from this?
Right.
It seems like such an effective package. So I'd love it if you could talk a bit about the people you interviewed, people who got out of it, and what you will be doing for your own kids.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up teen girls, and this is like a theme I come back to in my writing all the time. Like I actually think teen girls might be like the most like if you could harness the energy and like the intensity, you could power like cities. Like that is like the power of the collective of teen girls.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of I'm not a lot. I mean, I've done reporting on eating disorders, on cutting. You see the different
Mhm.
waves of what that is. I think the conversation about gender dysphoria actually fits into this in a certain way.
I think it fits into it in every way. I
Yeah.
think we're looking at two very similar phenomenon, and it's one of the things I point out. I'm like, okay, kids are going through puberty, and there's a community out there that says if you just do this, you will be comfortable with your body, and that affirms you obsessively whenever you're around them. Like in the same way that the fact that some spoonies are being talked into this or don't have these conditions, that doesn't mean these conditions don't exist. It
Right,
doesn't mean that POTS isn't a real condition, that there aren't really young girls who have chronic medical conditions. But when you create a community that affirms them around this, you
right.
have the potentiality of the psychological exasperation of prodromal or low level tendencies in these
Mm,
individuals, which I think you see within different youth communities with gender dysphoria. And I should point out, not just on the far left but also on the far right, I point
right.
out these Andrew Tate following guys, a lot of them seem to have a form of gender dysphoria where they want to
Mm.
define who they are based on their gender identity.
I also think there's, like, kind of a reflex to categorize everything. Like, you can't
Mhm.
just be tired, you have to have chronic fatigue syndrome. And, like,
No.
to answer your earlier question about how you protect against this, I'm one of 4 girls, and, like, female puberty is brutal, and your
Mhm.
body betrays you. And it's really confusing, and I think and you see this with anorexia, and maybe there's, like, an aspect of this
Mhm.
with the Spoonies, it's the want not to grow up, to have your
Yeah.
mother take care of you, to go to 0, to not be so wide, and I think as much as you we can encourage people and accept when someone says, "You know what? I'm feeling lazy, I'm feeling down, I'm feeling tired," and not be like, "You should go to the doctor and get a pill for that." That is something that must be categorized and medicated and more deeply understood because it's a pathology of some sort. I think that's one thing to do, but teenage girls the internet did not invent, like, teenage girls cracking up around the age of 14 or 15. That is gonna be forever, but the internet does do it amplifies it and it incentivizes it in ways that I
Yeah.
find interesting.
Well, to your earlier point too, the suffering that many of these young women feel is real, even if they don't technically have the actual condition they may think that they have.
Right.
That a lot of it then they psychosomatically give themselves that condition. And the same can happen with therapy culture, or this is controversial, but we would argue with gender dysphoria as well, where you may not actually be trans or you may not actually have post-traumatic stress or sorry, post-traumatic hmm?
Trauma just generally. Like,
Yeah,
I have
trauma in
noticed
Yeah.
general.
in the
Yeah.
community, a large one that is, I'd say adjacent to the Spoonie community, but still distinct from it, where the hierarchy is based around a trauma or something
Yeah.
traumatic that happened to them in their childhood, and
Right.
they begin to create these communities where there is a huge incentive to, imagine trauma that didn't happen.
But then that
Um,
creates real pain. That trauma,
Yes.
like,
yeah.
you are making it worse by leaning into it, but then also you end up in these communities where people use that, to your point as well, to virtue signal. And it's bad because you turn to it naturally as a solution. This is a problem I want to solve. I don't want this. This is bad and I need to get through it. But then you subconsciously, especially if you're a teenage girl, get sucked into the social dynamics. And then you're in this like status hierarchy game fighting for higher status without even knowing it because of the way your brain is wired at the time.
Right, and I'm
Ugh.
sure you were a young girl. I was obsessed with Holocaust books, and I didn't understand trauma or horrible things happening, and so there's this want of to go on chat roulette and see someone masturbating. Even though you're scared of it, you also wanna see it because you wanna know what's
Yeah.
happening, and you're afraid if you don't see it, someone's gonna make you watch it. It's
Yeah.
so confusing and intense, and to your earlier point of or I
Mm.
think a lot of how we got here in terms of the conversation about everyone's traumatized, I think it has to do with the spectruming of life. So sexuality is on a spectrum.
Ah.
Kinsey scale, I can get behind that.
Mm.
But now aggression is on a spectrum. Microaggression, macroaggression.
Oh.
Autism's on a spectrum. So it's if everything's a spectrum and we're all on it, we're all sick because sickness is a spectrum.
Yeah.
So I think as right as I think a lot of nuance is in terms of sickness, in terms of sexuality, in terms of a lot of these human experiences, I think for an undeveloped brain, it can also trick you into believing that you've been a victim of something and you're never not going to be a victim of that thing, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Well, and something that we have an episode on that we've filmed, it hasn't gone live yet, is on the idea of how our grandparents' generation essentially lived in a teen dystopian, and
Like,
that,
because like their boyfriends went off to war and stuff.
Well,
or
no,
they
like so
were
I
they were
recently
in
read
Europe.
my grandmother's autobiography during the occupation of Paris when she lived there. And
Mm.
she's describing like fleeing Paris while the Nazis are coming in. The roads are being bombed. She is driving her car across bridges that are actively being
But
bombed,
anyways, if
thinking,
you
I'm going to
watch the
die.
episode for this topic, the
Yeah, well,
point
and there's no
being
food, but because
is
it
in a
gives us the
historic.
impression there's
Mhm.
maybe this need to
Mhm.
have difficulty in life, that the
Mhm.
hardship is also part of a good upbringing, and we don't have it now, so we crave it. And we read these teen dystopias, and we subject ourselves to these stresses, and we try to find something that's wrong because we need something that's wrong.
But the point being is that I think people undersell, if you go back to our grandparents' generation or earlier, how insanely, quote unquote, in modern standards, traumatic the average human life was.
Right.
Seriously.
And that the anathema now is people living in environments where there is not genuine scarcity. And because of that, I think it's causing sort of psychological haywireness, almost to the extent of being like raised in a cage or something like that, where
Yeah.
they are seeking out forms of self-victimization and trauma where that is a thing of status and allure, and they read about it and they fantasize about it, which is just really fascinating. And I don't think that we expected humans to be like this.
Right, and then for us to put ourselves in the cages, it's let me sedate myself and let me come up with a justification for watching cartoons all day as, like, a grown woman, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And it's
your Herkle-Durkle story.
yeah, exactly, exactly, right, it all comes back. It all comes back to Hercule Durkle, but yeah, it's such it's amazing because it's very understandable wants being, I think, manifesting in a sort
Mhm.
of what am I trying to say? It's manifesting in a way that it's self-sabotaging
Yeah.
ultimately. And that's what's sad. But I think it's so interesting. Abigail Schreier has like just such a brilliant book out called, oh God, what's it called? I feel like we have it here. It's about therapy culture and it's just really interesting and how therapy is it's a medical treatment and hundreds and millions of kids are getting this medical treatment through their schools, through online, kind of unbeknownst to the parents, and it's shifting who the parents are. Is it the state? Is it the school? Is it your mom and dad? And you see this
Well,
I
I
won't
mean,
ruin it.
we talk about this a lot in other episodes, the cult of therapy and how it's transformed. It's building dependency with its patients and it's training them. One of my favorite lines that I just keep repeating, there was a popular online YouTuber that was like, don't people know about the number of young people with mental health issues? This is because we don't have enough therapists and they're not inexpensive enough.
Oh
And
my
I was like,
god.
do you think that our grandparents' generation had therapists? Do you think in the Old West there were therapists running around to kids, especially being like, oh, 10-year-old, we need to talk about your feelings? It's like, do you think that maybe that could be the problem? That
Right.
this correlation you're seeing here? And they're like, no, you don't understand. I'm traumatized. It's like, no, you don't understand. All of Europe, like all of our grandparents' generation who was in Europe, went through a form of trauma that you can't even begin to conceptualize outside of
Right.
fantasies.
Right.
Um, and they
That's
didn't go to psychologists about it. They didn't. It's wild.
Yeah, which isn't to say they aren't traumatized, and I think the thing with kids is, like, as an adult, and Abigail talks about this, you can push back on a therapist. You could say when she says this, "Hey, we're it's enough talking about my mother-in-law." As a child, you wanna please the adult that you're in the room with. You
Mhm.
don't understand that there's, like, a service being offered. You think you're in trouble, and I think therapy on adults and therapy on kids are very different propositions.
Oh, yeah, yeah, and especially the state-sanctioned, almost ubiquitous thing that's happening now, and I would
Mhm.
strongly recommend parents not send their kids to therapy. I've gotten to the point, it's not that therapy is bad. It is very useful for some people, but I think that the vast proportion of therapy that's being practiced on kids these days is not of the safe variety,
Mm,
and so it will likely, on average, make things worse rather than better, or even if it's a minority of cases where it's making things worse, it makes them so much worse that it's not worth really, yeah, medicalizing the rest of your kid's life over. But I want to talk about some of the interviews you did, some of the Spoonies you got to
sure.
know. What were they like? Describe these experiences.
It's interesting. They were so open with me, first of
Yeah.
all, which is always something I'm so grateful. I'm a stranger on the internet that I'm reaching out and I'm like, "And you said this ruined your sex life. Can you talk a little bit?" It's crazy.
Yeah.
But one of them, this quote that really struck me was that someone had asked what this girl who had this really rich life in college, uh, who she is outside of being sick, and she said, "My jaw hit the floor. I didn't know what to say." And that's someone who was able to go to college, was able to leave the house, and then, oh, it all goes backwards and everything is in
Mhm.
reverse, which I thought was interesting. Oh my god, it was so long ago. Who else did I talk to? Well, the main girl I talked to, Morgan, she described opening up an Instagram page, wanting to be like a Spoonie influencer. I have a piece coming out that I'm editing about unwellness influencers. Like we
Ooh,
all know wellness influencers with their Ayurvedic smoothies and whatever, but what about the unwellness influencers that
oh my
just encourages you to hurkle-durkle and everything else? But this girl, Morgan, she was in a hospital bed. I think she had been there for months. She had to gain weight, but she wasn't gaining weight. She had a PIC line. She had mouths. Nothing was working. She had stomach pains every time she ate, which got worse from the feeding tube. Blah. And then her mom came in and plucked her cell phone out of her hand. And that was the moment that she started to get better when her
wow.
mom cut her off from a community of people that she believed to be her friends. And I'm sure they were her friends. It was
Mhm.
a Snapchat group that she had like in 1,000-day streak with or whatever it was. And it gives you this sense of being understood, but you don't realize that there are like weights on your ankles while this is happening. It's like when you freeze to death, you feel warm at the last second or
Oh
Yeah.
something.
god.
But yeah, she was really interesting. And she didn't say, "Oh, I made it up." And I don't think she did, but she was able to have awareness about how this community has a really dark side and a side that doesn't
Mhm.
encourage you to get better.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing also that I think is really interesting, and I was mentioning this before we started recording, is how pervasive Spoonie language is. Even if people don't know
Mm,
what the community is, I had heard before I read your article about spoons, and then we were like, "Oh, this friend is a Spoonie, and this friend is a Spoonie," and some of them have even used these analogies with us, and we just didn't realize it. And then once we read your article, we started seeing this culture and bits of it everywhere. What scares me is that I think a lot of people fall into it without knowing what it is, and I think most Spoonies fall into it without knowing
Mhm.
what it is. When you discovered it, because you write about it as a cohesive thing, and from this very sober-minded perspective of an outsider, how did you manage to not just immediately fall right into it and fall for it like I think most people do? Even people who are like otherwise will say very critical of, maybe we'll say, like therapy culture or trans culture or anything. I think a lot of people still totally fall for this.
right.
Is there
Oh,
anything that
yeah,
tipped you?
because it's such a taboo thing to doubt someone's lived experience of
Yeah.
their illness. Yeah,
Yeah.
that horrible thing that I had to do. It's a good question. I think everyone always says follow the money, and when you have someone saying, "Hey, if you wear compression socks and you have to drink salt water all the time and your doctor says, 'Do you faint?' Even if you haven't fainted, maybe just tell them you fainted." And
Yeah.
also buy these $40 blue light glasses. I really have no problem getting into it when I feel that there is like quackery and people wasting their money on things that are ultimately harmful to them.
Mm.
Not to say that every person who identifies as a spoonie is trying to sell you like weird electrolyte tinctures, but I think that's part of it. And then I think throughout the whole internet, there is this like trauma porn or horror porn masquerading as raising awareness, the two most abused words in the English language. And I don't know, I call bullshit.
I love, because I'm thinking about this in a historic context. Like this it historically just would have been described as hysteria. Like, why
Right,
is it that these women have this affirmed in them? And what you said at the beginning is why this has been allowed to get out of control like this is doubting someone's lived experience is a sin within the shadow religion or whatever you want to call it, this
right.
alternative religious and theological system that exists within our
Mhm.
society, because there's no reason for that to be an intrinsically wrong thing. I call BS on what you're telling me. It sounds self-indulgent, but you're
Right.
not allowed to say that. But that's like a totally reasonable thing in a historic context to say to a teenage girl.
Ah,
I
but
think you're being a bit of a drama queen.
go
But
back to Jane Austen novels and like a common feature in them, like a common trope. It like the gay best friend of its time was this sickly mother or something who was just always had taken to her beds and
Yes.
swoons. And
yeah,
that was a thing. They were totally spoonies. There was a spoonie flare up during Regency era England among wealthy people. And again, it was wealthy white women doing it too, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
but I want to elevate something else you said that I thought was really interesting, which was the thing that broke her out of it is what is your identity outside of being sick? And I
Right.
think that this is where what you discovered in the story, I think is so useful to people, even who would never be at risk of becoming a spoonie, because as our society has moved to a secular place or a post-religious place, when people think about who they are, we are not given a good framework for determining that within our educational system. And so some individuals like Simone, I yourself, probably thought a lot about like, who am I? What do I want to be in the world? Like, how do I define which actions I take versus which actions I don't take? Like, I've
Right.
built some sort of like core moral framework that I'm living around. But some people, if they're just walk into this without thinking, it's very easy to accidentally say, who am I? Like, how do I define good action? I guess I'm this illness because this is what I get affirmed for in my community. Or I guess I'm a woman, right? And
Or this
therefore,
Andrew Tate thing, like you were pointing out earlier, right? I'm a just a manly man.
I'm a manly
I'm
man,
an
and
alpha.
I be myself by being a manly man. But this can also be political parties. A person decides I am a conservative, and therefore all the opinions I hold, everything I do during the day, and while not all of these communities are intrinsically as damaging to an individual as the Spoonie community, they fall into very similar psychological loops, which we are all susceptible to if we don't take time to have a firm understanding of what heuristics we are using to make decisions in our lives and choose a self identity.
Well, this is why I love you guys so much and love talking to you so much because you're one of the few people who actually believe things. And I know it sounds silly and are willing to say what you believe. And it's like, we believe in having lots of kids. You may not,
Yeah,
but that is the thing and it's, you're not trying to say you're both. And I
yeah,
think a lot of these communities, like the Andrew Tate manly men,
yeah,
they're defining themselves based on what they believe the culture has done to them. It's a
yeah.
grievance culture.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
same thing with Spoonies. And you brought up like that this is whatever filling the god-shaped hole in all of our hearts. I do think there's a spiritual aspect of there is badness. It has migrated to within me. I am dirty. I am sick. I must be cleansed, but none of it's my fault. It's like a little confused, but yeah, I think defining yourself based on lack, based on the fact that it's harder for you to run a mile because of
Yeah.
your condition is not a recipe for a good life.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the spiritual part because one of the things that I often say is like these evolved religious traditions, like they came with a lot of malware, but they were the only mimetic antivirus we as a species had.
Mm,
They were a bad antivirus. They were a heavy antivirus. They were like old school McAfee Norton, where it slowed down your computer by 60%,
right.
but it still fought the viruses. And when you completely remove it, you get these very simplistic mimetic viruses that certain people are just incredibly susceptible to.
Right. And certain people who I would argue are very sensitive and open. I don't
Yeah.
think they're like necessarily maladjusted. I just think we've taken all the guardrails off and here's what happens. I think a lot of these women might have been in a committed relationship if men could get it together. So there are a lot of factors that make it spin out of control.
Yeah. Well, if men could get it together. And this is interesting, is that in a post-scarcity world, finding your purpose. And I want to go back to this because most of the developed world, and especially the people who become spoonies, are living post-scarcity lives. Middle class white women. Most of them, that is
Right.
a post-scarcity lifestyle. You're not really going to starve or anything like that. There are things you want that you can't have, but those things are primarily status symbols that you primarily want because like they have generated value based on the fact that a lot of people want them and therefore you can't have them.
A nice car. What's an example?
Like a nice car or
Okay.
designer clothes, like nothing intrinsic about them. You can get clothes if you want clothes. The reason why nice clothes are something you can't get is the very reason you want them. Like they wouldn't be a status symbol if you could trivially get them. If you want a computer, you can get a computer from 2 years ago that costs like $200. Like
Right.
the things are always accessible to people. Smartphones are accessible to everyone. I think, what is it, like 89% of homeless people have a smartphone now? We are in an extremely, housing is probably the only thing of real scarcity in our society anymore.
Yeah. Interesting.
But we suspected as we transitioned to a post-scarcity ecosystem that people would begin to indulge in hedonism. And instead, what they indulged in was self-victimization, which allowed the removal of personal responsibility, which is, in a way, one avenue is Spoonieism. But indulging in self-victimization doesn't feel like indulging in self-victimization to the individual. It feels like highlighting the parts of themselves that differentiate them from society and thus make them special. And I think that you see this even within communities that I consider myself like I'm a pretty big supporter of the gay community, for
Mhm.
example. And what was really interesting is one of the things we mentioned is gay men. We've mentioned this before. 45% of gay men voted for Trump in the last election. Like the gay male community has changed so much.
45?
45%. Yeah, so much since I was a kid. When I was a kid, you had this hierarchy within the gay male community where you would act like more of a gay male to move up within this hierarchy. And so you had these very flamboyant gay men that have disappeared as part of our culture because being a gay male, especially a gay white male, no longer really others you in our society in the way it used to. So there is no longer a reason to build your identity around it in the way that many young men did when I was growing up.
Right. I think about this all the time. Like I'm the first woman in my generation, or I'm the first generation of my family as a
Mm.
woman who got to move to New York City, got my own apartment, got my own job, had my own money. Not because the women before me they were smarter than me, they were totally capable, but it just wasn't done. They got married early, they had kids, they had
Right.
probably a better life than me. But I like the liberation happened so quickly. And I think with gay male culture, everyone was dying 35 years ago.
Yeah, they
Everyone was dying, and now it's like
literally underwent basically a genocide.
it
Yeah.
was the craziest thing in the world, and then it's you shoot to the top of culture in this way that's almost it's incredible, it's a miracle, but it also, I think, induces some sort of, like, cultural vertigo of, "Okay,
Yeah.
where do we stand now? Who are we?" It's
Taken over by marginal portions of the LGBT community, and now you are the oppressor.
right, exactly, but even like a let's just say, like a gay guy
Yeah.
25 years ago wouldn't really dream of having a husband and kids and a white picket fence. The gay dudes of my generation, that's exactly what they want. They're getting married before me. So even a 10-year difference
Yeah.
has totally changed what's possible and therefore changed how what behavior you model.
Yeah.
Isn't that
Yeah,
wild?
when it really messes up the way adults are interacting with culture. Like even
Right.
us, we did an episode where we were talking about I grew up where gay men were genuinely impressed, oppressed, beaten up if they were found out. Like it was very rare that someone would come out. One of our listeners who was a Gen Alpha person was like, it's so weird to hear you say that because when I was growing up, being gay was a status symbol.
Oh, yeah.
Was in school and it gave you special protection from teachers, it gave you special access to things, and
Yeah, it
that
just means you're, like, vicious and fun.
Yeah.
yeah, and that the older population doesn't realize how much the pendulum has swung, and so they think that they are affirming an oppressed group without realizing they are pedestalizing the group that is at the top of the status hierarchy, which is really fascinating.
Right, and then, of course, with Gen Z who are having way less sex, queer just means, like, straight with weird hair or, like, straight with the right politics or whatever it
Yeah.
is. Like, it's the whole decoupling your sexual identity from what kind of sex you have I think is really interesting
Yeah.
because
I mean,
you no longer have to have gay sex to be gay.
yeah, we always point out that we are technically trans by LGBT ideology because we are a gender. I don't care what gender I am. If I woke up a woman tomorrow, it would not genuinely affect my life that
He'd
much.
work it.
Same with Simone.
You're just a brain and a head.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I'm just a
Yeah.
brain and a head, and that makes me agender from the perspective of trans ideology. Well, being agender is a form of genderqueer. Genderqueer is a form of trans. So
Right.
we are not incorrect in saying that we are fully trans within a trans moral architecture. And they'd say, well, no, you're not. And it's, well, then why no am I not? And it's because your politics aren't trans.
W
Because
Right.
we have turned these into political identities.
It's interesting too because this almost goes back to the Spoonie thing because it's like,
Yeah.
these are invisible illnesses. I don't need to look sick to be sick. I don't need to tell you my diagnosis to be sick. I can self-diagnose and be sick. I don't even need to go to a professional.
Yeah.
Similarly, with gender ideology, you don't have to present as a woman to be a woman. So it's all internal, but there's still this need to like signal to everyone else, but you don't need to do that because that has nothing to do with it. And I don't know. I think there's some sort of connection there where it's, yes, you a trans person, and me like a deathly sick person, even though observably none of those things are true.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, but
totally.
you're treated the same with society. In both cases, society doubts your and the supposed authorities within various professions doubt your lived experiences. And so you can come together under this umbrella of never doubt what I say is true about my experiences of reality.
Who coined?
Um,
We have to find who coined lived experience.
Yeah,
It's the most
yeah,
seriously.
unbelievable. It is like the trick of the century.
well, this has been such an engaging conversation. I almost feel like you could be a third host of the show.
Uh,
I get along with you so
So
well.
let's do it. Yeah.
And for our fans who say that there are not unmarried, like super, super eligible women, now I think she's dating and stuff like that now, but she doesn't have a ring on it yet. And this means you should be sending applications because she is
yes.
attractive, based, and super intelligent. Okay.
The
And
last
we
one,
need
ladies and
to start
gentlemen.
getting kids. And so I don't care how that happens.
Uh,
My kids need people to marry. I always say this. That's what
oh,
we're
that's
out there
amazing.
encouraging. So this call has been absolutely fantastic. Please check out her stuff. Create a Google alert with her name if you want. Do you have a Google alert with her name, Simone?
No,
I
because I just subscribed to the Free Press.
Yeah,
And that's,
subscribe to
yeah.
the Free Press. That's the best thing to do. Go to
Yeah.
thefp.com/subscribe.
All the content's really good, but Suzy's is the best. And you, man, I want to see more. Every time I see the Free Press, I'm like, is it Suzy? And not enough. Come on, man. All right.
All right.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thanks
guys
so
so
much.
much.